Thank you, Steve, and good afternoon, everybody. Definitely felt like with the way this spring or with the way it's been, whatever we have, winter, spring, with the way it's been playing out, that there's some urgency to this topic because it seems like pastures might be ready earlier than what we normally anticipate this year, but now it looks like everything might be thrust back into winter, and maybe we have a little more time to think about this after all. So today I'm going to just kick this off by talking about and just getting us thinking about how we can improve the production potential of our pastures. And this is really the beginning of the conversation. It's a little bit of a trip back to the basics. A lot of us maybe are well aware of the basics, but it's always good to use that as a starting point and to really understand the role that management plays in all of this. So as a grazing specialist, I get a lot of questions from people about managing pastures, about the forage base. How can we get more forage? How can we get better grass in our pastures? How can we graze longer? And then usually those questions lead to more questions that are based on inputs. What seed should we buy to fix this production problem? How much fertilizer should we be applying? Should we replant our pastures and try to get a better forage base? And then normally we follow that up with some more questions to try to get a little more context before we give a recommendation. And that's, well, have you soil sampled, and what do your soil analyses tell you? What kind of grass do you have in your pasture? How many acres of pasture do you have, and how many head do you have on those acres? Basically, what's your management? And so really, this all comes down to management. When we talk about the production potential of pastures in Wisconsin, or anywhere for that matter, it really comes down to management, and that's where it all needs to start. So today I'm really going to cover 4 things to kind of set this up for then the conversation to be continued by Steve. We're going to talk about the principles of managed grazing, the role stocking rate plays, the idea of maximizing the grazing season, and then also a stockpile grazing. That's not a complete list of things that we need to consider for managing pastures, but those are the things that I'm gonna spend some time on today. So often grazing can be misunderstood because there's so many variations of it. Over 50%, about 59% of permanent perennial pastures in Wisconsin are managed with continuous grazing. And continuous grazing doesn't always, it's not a rule, but it is often associated with overgrazing and overstocking. And so we have a lot of those 59% of pastures in Wisconsin that are continuously grazed end up being lower performing pastures over time. And so often we talk about managed grazing, and that's what I'm going to talk about the rest of the time here. And so it's important to understand the difference. What makes managed grazing different than other types of grazing? And that'd be the principles of managed grazing. So we call those the 3 R's: rotation, rest, and residual. We want to rotate, and I don't want people to get hung up on this. I've talked about rotation a lot this winter, and farmers who aren't rotating at all can get hung up on this 1 to 3 day recommendation. Any rotation is better than no rotation, even if it's weekly. So rotating at all will move things in a positive direction for production potential. That's because we need to rest pastures occasionally. We know this well from what we know about managing hay fields and alfalfa and other forages. We need to rest them before we come back and harvest again. And we want to leave behind 4 to 6 inches of residual, which is a little more than what we would typically do in a harvested scenario. And then I throw a fourth R in there, which is stocking rate. And that's because all of this is predicated on stocking rate. And if we don't have the right stocking rate, none of these other principles can be applied. So these are not the principles of managed grazing, but these are kind of added to it. So these would be common goals of a managed grazing operation. So it'd be a diverse perennial forage base, a consistent yield, high forage quality, keeping a low impact on the land, maintaining good animal performance. If you do all this, but the animals fall apart, then there's no point in doing it. Minimal off-farm inputs. That's basically to minimize cost and maximizing the grazing season. So when we talk about maximizing the grazing season, there's all kinds of management things. And this list here is very incomplete as well, but this is just a snapshot of the year across a managed grazing operation. I'm really focused on these areas here in the red circles. And how can we extend the grazing season as much as possible into those? So the minimum goal should be to get to the dormant season with grazing. A better goal would be to get partway through the dormant season with grazing. So we often talk about extending the grazing season, which Steve is going to talk more about, and there's absolutely a place for that. But maybe before we talk about extending the grazing season, we should understand how to maximize the perennial base that we already have. And that's really what I'm getting at today. So how do we do that? Well, the 3 R's are foundational. So there's a few different ways to look at the role that these 3 R's play in a grazing operation. So these data here are from UW trials for multiple years from different soil types. And this is from a silt loam soil type, I should say. So all of these are pretty fairly, we'll say, medium production soil and just under different rotation intervals. So you can see set stocked here, which is the pasture all year, and then various intensities of subdividing the pastures. So subdividing them to move them daily, all the way through monthly moves. And you can see for 20 mature beef cows here, how many acres of pasture you need for each type of frequency of rotation. So rotating is a big deal because it allows us to rest and regrow. Residual is a big deal because it protects those pastures. So here is one overgrazing event that occurred in October, and then the yields for the entirety of the season, the next grazing season. Yields were decreased by 25% where this was overgrazed one time for the entire next season, which resulted in a 26% lower stocking rate. The reason why this works the way it does is because we need to leave behind residual for photosynthesis to happen. And when we take too much of that, now any of the energy that is being captured by that plant is going toward regrowing root reserves. When we leave 50% of it behind, we're not stalling that. All of the energy that's being captured is going toward above ground regrowth. And we often see that with orchard grass in a hayfield. Oftentimes before we pull into that field with a baler or a chopper, you can already see regrowth before the windrows are even out of the field. Now I have to see how I can, with my pointer here, advance my slide. There we go. So this is more the same data from Wisconsin as well, just showing the effect of residual. So here we have management, intensive rotational grazing, and here we have harvesting. So If you think about it, this is just looking at two different residual heights, 6-inch residual versus 3-inch. And this is in metric units, but I converted this here just for reference. So this would be 4.9 tons per acre of dry matter under the management intensive rotational grazing for the total season yield. And you can see how the others stacked up against that. So this is just showing what rotation and residual, the importance that they play in maximizing production of our pastures. So I mentioned earlier that none of this is possible if we're overstocked. So one of the questions we get all the time is, how many animals can I have? That's basically called stocking rate or carrying capacity. What is the carrying capacity of your land? Many farmers don't have a good idea of this. They just start stocking their farm and end up feeding hay by the middle of August every year, not realizing that they're not really seeing the full potential of their farm just because of stocking rate. So this is a publication that I believe will be made available to you. It is accessible online now, but this is intended to walk farmers through this process of figuring out what the carrying capacity is of their farm. And there's all these different components to it. And some farms may say, well, I'm not going to stockpile graze. So some of these won't apply to a farm, but if you're going to apply everything that I talk about in this presentation today, including producing hay for winter feed, this accounts for all of that and helps the farmer determine how many animals they can have on their farms. So I talked about stockpile grazing. The reason why I really emphasize stockpile grazing as a practice for maximizing the grazing season is because we're utilizing the perennial forage base that already exists. So Steve might talk about some other practices for extending the grazing season, which are great. But really there's no more cost-effective method of extending the grazing season than getting the most out of what we already have established, the perennial base. By doing that, we can defer winter feed. We can begin stockpiling around August 1st. We let those pastures to rest and grow until killing frost, and then begin grazing them when the rest of the cool season pastures shut down. And really what it's doing is minimizing that amount of time that we need to feed hay. So this is a trial that we conducted at the research station with dairy heifers, and this is just showing average daily gains during the stockpile grazing season, which differ with different species. And we can see we really had some nice average daily gains there, and you can see what the forage availability was. We had the potential to graze 60 to 80 days with that forage. So if we take that work with all the previous stockpile grazing work that's been conducted in Wisconsin and kind of summarize it all together, what we can expect with stockpile grazing is about 1 to 1.5 tons of dry matter per acre without nitrogen fertilization. If we do fertilize, we can increase that up to 2.7 tons. The irrigation, not many people are going to be irrigating stockpiling, but what this is showing is how important some fall rainfall is for that. And then do expect that yield to decline the longer we go into the winter. So it's better to try to hit that in November and December. And then we see the same thing happen with quality. Starts out very high quality, and then that quality will decline over time from December through March. But it's a practice that is pretty consistent that we really should be taking advantage of on grazing operations in Wisconsin. So I thank you. I know that was very quick. There's also a publication I didn't mention on that previous slide to kind of help walk through how to set up stockpile grazing as well. So thank you.